Welcome everyone to the fourth and final lesson of the Preces Latin Toolkit. Today we're doing some pretty crazy stuff. We're going to cover the infinitive, the imperative mood, the subjunctive mood, and then participles and the gerund. So strap in, let's get into it. So let's recap. We remember from last time that Latin verbs are conjugated. Okay, so the ending tells you the person doing the action, first, second, third, singular or plural, the tense of the action, the voice, so voice is active or passive, and the mood, which is indicative, imperative or subjunctive. Okay, so before we start, as always, we remember that Latin is logical, so we can explain it, and anyone can learn Latin. And last lesson we had on this slide, we had a great white shark. It was a bit scary, so I thought we'd have something not as scary, but as I reflect on it now, like if you got up in the morning, I always feel pretty rough. I often get up quite early. I feel pretty rough in the morning. And if your toast was alive, that might be worse than a great white shark. But anyway, let us continue. The tenses. Remember, in Latin, we've got tense as something that conveys both time and aspect of action. So the aspect can be continual or completed, and a completed action will be one of the perfect tenses, perfect, pluperfect, or future perfect, and the continual action will be the others, and then each of those can be considered as being in the present, in the past, or in the future. Voice and mood, we talked about this already. Voice can be active or passive. The boy hit the ball is active. The ball was hit by the boy is passive. And then the moods, indicative, imperative, subjunctive. There's also something called the infinitive, which is sort of a type of unbounded verb. It's not really considered a mood in Latin. Let's look at the infinitive first. So in English, verbs like when we say of a verb to run, to hit, to call, that's an infinitive because it doesn't tell you anything about who's doing it or how many people are doing it, and it doesn't even really tell you anything about tense, so it's sort of infinitive in that sense. And so in Latin, it's the unconjugated part of the verb, or the second principal part, right? So when you look up a verb in a dictionary, in a Latin dictionary, you'll actually get 4 versions of it. Here with the verb to love, oops, got to turn my laser pointer on. There we go. Amo, amare, amavi, amatus. Amo is the first person singular present. Amare is the infinitive. And the other 2 principal parts are used to make up different tenses and moods of the verbs. Okay, so we won't be concerned with that now. The infinitive, however, is formed by basically is formed from the second principal part. Okay, and you can have a present perfect or future infinitive. For our purposes in the Preces, it's really just going to function like it does in English and in the present, right? And we'll see an example of that now. So, animas Christo lucri facere quaeramus. So, let's unpack this. So, animas means souls, okay? And it's an accusative plural, so it's going to be some kind of object, probably. Christo, from Christ, Christos. That's a dative version. And then quaeramus is a verb meaning that we may seek. Okay. So, lucra facere, what does that mean? Just the tables to prove to you, Christus and anima. Lucra facere means to gain or to win. And it's the infinitive. Oops, sorry. So really, all this means we seek, or that we may seek, to gain souls for Christ. Okay? What are we seeking to gain? The object, the direct object, so the accusative, animas. We are seeking to gain for Christ souls. So that's an example of the infinitive in action. Let's now look at the imperative. We said last time that the imperative mood is the mood of command, and you often see it with a noun in the vocative case, right? You form the imperative by taking the infinitive and ripping the re off it. So for example, for the verb amo or amare, to love, amare is the infinitive form, rip off the re, and the imperative in the singular is ama. If I'm commanding more than one person, I'll use a plural imperative, and it's formed usually by adding te to the end. Now, we're not going to really get bogged down memorizing any of this, just for you to know that, again, the same principle applies. The form of the word changes, its ending changes to tell you what sort of verb it is, okay? So, let's look at an example. Exsurge Christe adiuva nos. So Christe, we might remember from previous videos, is a vocative form of Christ. So we're addressing Christ. You, Christ, okay? And in this example, exsurge and adiuva are imperatives. So the fact that we've got a vocative there, Christe, is a bit of a clue that there might be an imperative around. And in fact, we've actually got two. Nos is just the accusative version of us, the pronoun us. So let's look at exsurge. Exurgo or exurgere is a verb meaning to arise or to stand up. We take the infinitive, exurgere, we rip off the re, and we get exurge. So exurge is the imperative of arise. It means arise. And then ditto with adiuvare, to help or encourage, we rip off the re, and we get adiuva. So this sentence literally just means, arise, Christ, help us. Okay, now we get to the subjunctive. Tricky for English people. Now the subjunctive will convey us conditional information, and it'll do it in either a main clause or a subordinate clause. Now remember, the indicative mood talks about facts and reality. Imperative mood is a command, and then the subjunctive is giving us, possibilities, things we wish for, things we're afraid of, things that might or might not happen, etc. There are 4 tenses in the subjunctive. The indicative has 6. 4 tenses in the subjunctive: present, perfect, imperfect, and pluperfect. Again, I'm mentioning them for completeness to give your brains sort of a structure to put things in, but we're not going to rote learn all of these things. We'd be at it for months and months and months. And similarly, of course, the subjunctive also has active and passive voices. So let's have a look at some examples, and I'm mainly going to just give you examples in English so you can understand the concept. So in a main clause, the main clause is the part of a sentence that could be the sentence by itself. So let's look at the examples. Firstly, adjussive or hortatory use of the subjunctive would be, an example would be let's eat. So let's eat actually could be a sentence. Not a very interesting one. It might be if you're hungry, but it could be a sentence. A potential use, we could eat, could also be a sentence, right? Optative, I wish we could eat, or deliberative, should I eat, or should we eat, right? They're all main clause uses of the subjunctive. But often you'll see the subjunctive in a subordinate clause. A subordinate clause is an extra clause in a sentence that couldn't be the sentence by itself. So let's unpack what that means looking at the example. So it can convey purpose. So I went to the restaurant so I could eat. So the subordinate clause is in this beautiful lilac colour. I went to the restaurant could be a sentence by itself. So I could eat couldn't be a sentence by itself. It's a subordinate clause. And if this was in Latin, we would be using a subjunctive mood version of the verb to eat, right? We don't have that. We don't do that in English. We do it by using words like so and could. It can also convey a result. I was very nervous, so I ate chocolate. An indirect question. I want to know where you keep the chocolate. Okay. Circumstantial. When I study, I eat chocolate. Or conditions. If you come to my house, you would eat some chocolate. Or if you had come to my house, you would have eaten chocolate. So these are all just examples of the subjunctive clauses in English. In Latin, the verb's going to change its ending to indicate to you that it's a subjunctive clause, and there may or may not be prepositions or words like so or if or when, okay, in the Latin. This box is just, again, a little bit of extra information to show you why have we even got different tenses in the subjunctive. basically, if the main verb, so if you think about this first sentence, I went to the restaurant, went is the main verb, okay? It's in the main clause, right? So if the main verb is present or future, then you use a present or perfect subjunctive, depending on whether it's continuous or completed action. If the main verb is a past tense, you would use an imperfect or pluperfect subjunctive. Again, this is all just for context. You don't need to memorize it. I think we said that. Associated English words that we would use in conveying the same idea in English are let, may, would, could, etc. Here's just an example, just so you've seen it, of a present active subjunctive. This is using the verb amo again. So it's amem, ames, amet, amemus, ametis, ament. Again, we're not going to learn that. And here's just another example of the verb adiova or adiovare, which we've seen using the imperative example a few slides back. Here are the indicative, present, perfect, etc. versions. And then here are the subjunctive versions of adiovare. Again, we're definitely not memorizing that. Let's look at an example. It's quite a long example. Let's just unpack it a little bit. Si consistant adversum me castra, non temebit cor meum. Si exurgat adversum me prelium, in hoc ego sperabo. Now in red, we've got the main clauses, non temebit cor meum and in hoc ego sperabo. So non temebit cor meum, cor means heart, cor meum means my heart, and it's nominative, so it's the subject. Timebit is the future third person singular of to be afraid, timeo. So timebit cor meum means my heart will be afraid or will fear. Non timebit cor meum means my heart will not be afraid or will not fear. Okay. In hoc, this means basically in this. Ego sperabo. Sperabo is the future first person singular of hope. So sperabo means I will hope. So in this, I will hope. And the ego doesn't need to be there grammatically, it's just there for emphasis. So this lilac colour, these are the subordinate clauses. And consistent and exurgat are in the subjunctive mood. So let's look at that, okay? So here are the nouns, castra and prelium. Castra means an army. It's actually a plural noun, so use the plural form. It could also mean like a military camp, but in the Preces we translating as army. Prelium means battle, and it's a nominative, singular, and adversus is an adjective meaning against. So consisto is a verb meaning to stand or to take a position. Consistant is the subjunctive present of the third person plural, so it means they take a position. So this clause here means if an army takes a position against me. Okay, so me is a personal pronoun in the accusative. Adversum means against me. Here's the nominative plural, and then the third person plural subjunctive. If an army takes a position against me, my heart will not fear. Exurgo means to rise up or to stand. So this means battle. Okay, if a battle arises against me, in this will I hope. Okay. Oh, we said all that. So this whole sentence means if an army stands against me, my heart will not fear. If battle rises against me, in this will I hope. Okay. That's exhausting, isn't it? Let's look at participles, seeing as we're exhausted. A participle, we don't think about them much in English, but it's basically when a verb behaves as an adjective, okay? And again, in Latin, the verb form is modified. Because it behaves like an adjective, it must agree with the noun that it describes in case, number, and gender. But because it's also a verb, it has tense and voice. This is getting pretty crazy. Just understand the concepts. Yeah, the tense and voice gives us 4 types. So present and future, perfect, and future passive. So most of them two of them, present and future, are active, and then there's a passive perfect and a passive future. Let's look at some examples to understand this, right? A surprising situation, okay? Surprise is a verb, but situation is a noun, so a surprising situation. Surprising is actually a participle. It's describing the situation, right? Like an adjective. The boy, having been surprised, that's a perfect passive because it's completed action, right? The girl is listening, another present active participle. Listen is a verb, okay? And listening is actually describing her, right? The man is going to die. Going to die is a future active participle. Or the man will be killed as a future passive participle, right? Again, describing the man. Again, just for context, you can see how the endings of the verb are going to change. And if you see an N, that's often a participle in the ending, right? If you see an N in the ending, it's often a participle of some kind. Not all participles have an N, sadly. You've just got to learn it. If you're learning Latin properly, you have to just absolutely rote learn it. Let's look at this. There's no N in this, so this is an example of a participle with no N. Omne regnum divisum concesse desilabitur. We've had this example before. So regnum just means kingdom, right? It's in the nominative case. Every kingdom. Divisum is the perfect passive participle of this word divido, which means dividing, right? To divide, right? So divisum, as the perfect passive participle, means having been divided. So, and we remember from previously, this means desilabitur means will be laid waste. It's a future passive. So here we've got, we said that, yep. Every kingdom, or all kingdoms, sorry, too quickly. Every kingdom divided against itself will be laid waste. And divisum is the participle. Okay, the gerund. Almost done. The gerund is similar to a participle. It's a verb acting not as an adjective, as in the participle, but this time as a noun. Okay? In English, it's pretty much always translated with an ing. Ing can also mean a participle, of course, right? So here's a nice example. The thinking man says that the only thing that matters is thinking. So here we've got thinking acting as both a participle and as a gerund in this sentence. So the thinking man, it's describing the man, okay? The man is the noun, so thinking, describing him, so that's a participle. The only thing that matters is thinking. Thinking here is acting as a noun, so it's a gerund, okay? If you want to tell the difference between a gerund and a participle, they say, and the neat little trick is to insert an infinitive and see if it still makes sense. And if it still makes sense, it's a gerund. So, for example, I would like the chance of meeting Blaise Pascal, which I would. I can't, of course, because he's dead. I could say I would like the chance to meet Blaise Pascal, and that makes sense. So that means, in this case, it's a gerund. But if I say I saw him trying to be kind, and I try the little trick, I saw him to try to be kind, doesn't work. So trying must be a participle. Again, you're probably not going to really need that for the Preces, but I think some of these things help us to understand a little bit what we're talking about. Now, the gerund, similar to participles, has case, genitive, dative, accusative, ablative, isn't used in the nominative or the vocative. You only use an infinitive in that case. Here's an example of the formation of a gerund. And if you see nd together, that's often a gerund. Okay? So in the case of the verb amo, which we've been using, to love or I love, the gerund is amandi, amando, amandum, amando. Okay? Let's look at an example on the Preces. And then we're nearly done. Actiones nostras quesumus domine, aspiranda preveni et adiuvanda prosequere. Aspiranda, preveni, adiuvando, and prosequere all come from verbs, and preveni and prosequere are verbs, but aspirando and adiuvando are actually gerunds, okay? So aspirando, the verb is aspiro, meaning to breathe or aspire, and adiuvando, the verb is adiuvo, which means to help or assist. And so what this sentence actually means when we translate it is, our actions, we ask you, Lord, may begin, preveni, with your inspiration, okay, It's an ablative, so we can use the word with it, okay? And proceed, prosecere, there's the verb, with your help. Adiuvando, so help and inspiration are nouns here, right? And again, it's an ablative, so we can use the preposition with. So you can see how these verbs get transformed into noun equivalents. So we begin with your aspiration and continue with your help, or our actions rather, not us. Our actions begin with your inspiration and proceed with your help. Okay, recap and then we're completely finished. Okay, lessons 1 and 2 we did nouns. We talked about case, gender and number. We talked about adjectives and that they have to agree with their nouns in case, gender and number, and we can look them up in tables, right? The substantive is an adjective behaving as a noun. The case determines the word function in a sentence, so not the word order, like in English. The case of the noun determines its word function. So the subject will be in the nominative case, the direct object in the accusative case, the indirect object in the dative case. The indirect object, remember, receives the direct object. And then instruments, agents, causes are in the ablative case. Pronouns like I, me, you, him, her, etc. also have case, gender and number. And then in lessons 3 and 4 we did verbs. Verbs are conjugated, okay? The ending changes, so there's no need for the pronoun to tell you who's doing the action. You do need a noun if you're talking about a third person, like Paul hit the ball. You can say he hits the ball, that's fine. You don't need the pronoun. But if you want to specifically say that Paul hits the ball, you need to say Paul, right? Verbs also have tense, and there are 6 tenses. I'm not going to read them out. You can go back and look. Verbs also have voice, which is active or passive, and verbs have mood. So there's the indicative, which is the main one, facts, the subjunctive, and there's a lot of subjunctive verbs in the Preces, which we'll see in the next series of videos. Subjunctive, covers, hypothetical possibilities, and then the imperative mood, which covers commands. Participles are when verbs behave like adjectives, and a gerund is when a verb behaves as a noun. And that, thanks be to God, is the end. Thank you for watching and listening.